Hello colleagues and welcome. Welcome back to this 22nd meeting of the Technology Executive Committee. Welcome to our fourth day. Welcome to TEC members and observers and everybody who is joining us via the webcast. You're all very welcome indeed. We have been quite efficient in this meeting and we may well conclude our work today earlier than scheduled. Yesterday, following the consideration of the items under agenda item 4 of the rolling work plan, we considered some of the items under agenda item 7, other matters. Today, however, is a bit different. We are beginning with a launch event of the TEC's compilation of good practices and lessons learned on international collaborative RD&D initiatives on climate technology. Now, this is a publication that the TEC finalised last year and which was recently published earlier this year. The launch event presents the main findings of the publication, and we're very fortunate to have expert panelists with us who will be throwing some additional light on this topic. So you're all, of course, very welcome indeed. We will also be welcoming questions and answers from participants joining us via the webcast. After the event, we will continue with our remaining agenda items. The event will be moderated, I should say, by Dr. Peter Schneering, who is the founder of Future Clean Tech Architects. And Peter, you're very welcome to take the floor.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for this. Welcome everybody also from our side. Stephen has already mentioned a couple of important points of what we would like to cover today. So my name is Peter Schneering. I was introduced already. Let's not lose any further time, but continue with this very exciting program and the panelist we're about to hear. So again, just drawing upon what Stephen said, what is the report about? What is the compilation about? You remember, those of you who've worked on it, who've had a look, and we always try to keep in mind we have some external visitors today who are not part of the key tech group of people who work on this regularly. So I might ask you to explain a bit here or there in a little more detail. But this compilation, which Stephen just mentioned, aims to facilitate the sharing of information of international RD&D partnerships and initiatives. So including some of the panelists who join us today have worked on this, and from a broad compilation of such initiatives, they have basically selected and analyzed a set of representative case studies. Many of you know them or know some of the results already. We'll try to walk you through them, and we have a program that both gives, I think, enough space to this particular report, to this compilation, and at the same time we try to look to the horizon a little bit. We try to integrate some perspectives from panelists who have not worked on this report specifically, but also try to bring an industry perspective, try to bring, for example, a perspective which a large number of experts just contributed to an R&D survey on future R&D needs, which we have just published through the World Economic Forum. Maybe you should allow one more sentence on Future Clean Tech Architects. We're a think tank, we work globally, but we're located in Germany, and we focus only on high impact innovation for the energy transition. So we only look at technologies that have, if successfully commercialized, a disproportionate effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And this is why this compilation is so interesting for us, and why working with this or moderating this is so interesting for our experts. And at the same time, we hope to also bring some light to this debate. Okay, what is our program for today? You've probably seen it. We will first hear a brief presentation on this compilation of good practices and lessons learned, which Stephen has offered to give. So he will walk us through some of the key findings, because those of you who've had a look at the executive summary or at the summary itself or read the whole report know, there's some general observations and there are some best practices which have been identified. In the second step, I would like 3 or 4, if we include Stephen, very interesting panelists who will shed light from various perspectives on these findings. And then we would continue with a Q&A session where you have the option to ask your questions, which will be orchestrated and facilitated by the UNFCCC's tech team. And finally, we will then make a brief wrap up and have some closing remarks on what this session today has brought us and what kind of key findings we have had from this. So without further ado, I'd actually like to give pass the ball back to Stephen, who has prepared an excellent presentation and summarizing some of the key results of this compilation. Stephen, will you take over again?
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, for that introduction and also putting this work in some context. So I see the presentation is up. Can I have the second slide, please? So just to put this work in a little bit more context, it is in fact the Paris Agreement itself which highlights the importance of research and development and innovation. And that is a priority which has been further elaborated by the technology framework of the Paris Agreement, which provides overarching guidance to both the TEC and the Climate Technology Centre and Network. So this has really come from parties as a priority, and this work is aiming to elaborate on a portion of that to understand lessons that can be learned from existing international RD&D collaborations and to identify, as the authors have tried to do, a set of good practices. So the scope of this work, I think, is part of its contribution in that it is completely focused on RD&D collaborations at an international level. So that's been defined as we see here, where different countries and or regions are jointly conducting the work, RD&D activities, so from research to demonstration in the technology cycle, and of course involving climate technologies. So we're not looking here at things such as that's important, but it's different, and this is, or at least this attempts to be, a more focused work. Can I have the next slide, please? So here are the 8 case studies which have been selected and winnowed down from a much longer list as the document notes. A few things to note here. Some of these case studies, some of these projects are focused on mitigation or adaptation. Some of them are broader, and the form of collaboration is also different. In some cases, there is a consortium of partner institutions who are driving it. A platform or indeed a network. So there are a number of variables here, and also in terms of who is involved. Is it North-South cooperation, South-South cooperation? Is it a global collaboration with many countries, many member states and other institutions, etc.? So there are a number of important differentiating factors. Of course, we can't go through each of these, but if we can have the next slide, please. I thought it would be useful to spend a couple of minutes zooming in on one case study in particular, just to try and make this a bit more concrete and to see what it is that is under study in this publication. So one of the 8 case studies is the Joint Initiative on Research and Innovation. And this is a bi-regional initiative in the sense that it is a collaboration between the European Union and the Latin America and Caribbean region. And you can see the various details here involving which states are involved, geographic scope. It is indeed relevant to both mitigation and adaptation. In fact, it is not specifically badged as a climate initiative at all, but in fact climate is a cross-cutting factor in the different projects which are funded by it. And if you look at the actors again, you find it's very heavy in terms of the participation of universities and research organizations. It is steered by government, by official actors, and it has a smaller amount of participation by the private sector. So this is an example of a broad platform with many different participants, but having at its core this bilateral, bi-regional cooperation. Next slide, please. Now, the particular institutional framework has changed over time, but essentially this initiative has been a series of calls for proposals of projects, some of which have been funded, as we see 64 out of 335 submissions. And this is actually a theme of the overall paper. The funding itself is mixed. So although a majority of the funding has come from the EU, indeed 32% has come from the LAC region. And that is important in terms of buy-in, in terms of joint ownership. In terms of the kinds of projects that have been funded, again, it is quite broad. We have seen new materials research, laboratory testing, piloting of technologies, also joint knowledge platforms. So quite broad in terms of the structure of these projects. And as you can see, also thematically quite broad in terms of the areas of the projects, although, as I say, climate change has been a cross-cutting factor. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons that have attempted to be drawn from this case study, the importance of peer learning. So this is not just a north to south project, but it is involving multiple developing countries within the project, learning from each other, as well as the EU counterparts. The issue of replicability, the paper notes that this model could also be used in other kinds of bi-regional cooperations, and then a variety of good practices here. And I won't take you through these in detail, because I think, having discussed this a little bit, we can now expand the lens again to the overall publication. So can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So now we're talking about all 8 case studies, and these are the various good practices that are identified. As you can see, some of them are indicative of the case study that we just saw. High-level political buy-in. We often hear reference to political will when we're talking about climate change, but it's actually very important to have a stable commitment from the two sides, or indeed the many sides if it's a plurilateral arrangement. Joint ownership, we have already discussed. Broad participation, alignment with national priorities. So many of these projects do not specifically reference nationally determined contributions and technology needs assessments, etc., but still they can be very relevant to them. And then a variety of other very important factors. The next slide, please. So some of the lessons that have attempted to be drawn from the overall study, it turns out that relatively few of the projects that are funding RD&D on hard technology concern adaptation. Most of them concern mitigation. Most of the projects are public sector led, they're official initiatives. There's a relative dearth of independent assessments and evaluations, and improving that is a major recommendation here. And of course, also the importance of a local presence and capacity building. So final slide, please. These recommendations very much reflect the experiences and lessons learned that we've already described, so I won't go through them in any great detail, but this is the offering of the paper. Perhaps some of these are a bit provocative, and I hope they generate discussion and sharing of experiences. But we very much do hope that this paper will be useful to stakeholders, and I look forward to the remaining discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I think that was a very concise representation of the key findings and also the methodology of how you went about, how the TEC team and its involved experts went about this compilation. Now, a couple of things come to mind right away. You know, we work in clean tech, in technology and process development, in projects across the globe, basically, and also in a lot of hardware projects. And so many important points were stressed regarding the stakeholders that need to be involved, regarding the public-private cooperation. And I think we should take a look at this in a little more detail. So with this fresh input of Stephen in mind, I would like to welcome all of our panelists today, the 3 additional panelists, to Stephen, who's already taken the stage. And yes, the first question I'd actually like to ask all of you, and combined with this question, I'd like to ask you to briefly introduce yourself and possibly also tell us about your role in this process of this compilation, because some of you are involved in depth, some of you are not involved in all. And so that the audience knows you have either been collaborating on this specifically, or you are more one of these stakeholders who's out there taking decisions on clean tech, making investments, working on innovation and international collaboration, and you bring a different perspective to the table. So as first on this list, I'd like to welcome Javiera Aldunate Bengolea, who is head of the International Affairs Office of the Ministry of Energy from Chile. And she has another appointment this afternoon, so we will not keep her too long. And in addition to that, she is vice chair of the steering committee of Mission Innovation, this highly important international platform. So Javiera, are you there? Can you hear us? I would like to ask you as a first question, welcome you first, and of course ask you as the first question, what's your key takeaway from this? What struck you most about this report? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter and Stephen. I hope you can hear me well. As you say, I'm not part of the study, but I'm kind of part of the execution, because as a vice chair of Mission Innovation, we have a lot of experience and a lot of key findings that are interesting for us to acknowledge and to be part of the organization. So thank you very much for the study, because it's really useful for us as an organization. It's difficult to say just one key finding, and I can say I will highlight 3 of them. The first one is the importance of the diversity in collaboration. I see that all types of collaboration are necessary: bilateral, multilateral, and also plurilateral. We must have diverse actors, integrate them, share information, and also an important, really important point is to share that information to make technology go, the insertion of new technologies to be faster. When we show the data and when we show the information, we can reach more people, and the effect of that is that we can reach more people, so the technology will be adopted more faster and more easily. The second point that I want to highlight is the importance of multidiscipline or interdiscipline. If we have more visions, we have more possibilities to reach the right answer. We have to integrate different backgrounds, different ages, different specialities, and so on, different countries. We must look for reference in all sectors, not just the energy sector. We can see that maybe the answer is on development in another sector, and we're searching for something that it's already being analyzed. So as we can see, the energy sector is changing really fast, it's transforming. So the only way to really advance more faster is integrate those other sectors that can only bring more benefits. And the last thing that I want to highlight is the importance of transferring this information. We have to be able to transfer the information in the right way, making it easy. We're used to talking like in hard words. So I think we have to communicate all the results, all the little paces that we're giving, so we can reach all a broader audience, a different audience who can pay more attention of what we are doing. It's necessary to recognize the needs of each country or each region which have different speeds in adopting new technology. So I think we have to be always ambitious and think in a long term, but this vision should be based in the identity and the capacity of each country or region to develop new technologies. So that would be my 3 key findings.
Thank you so much, Javier. This is great. So let me briefly summarize. You say we have, on the one hand, we need diversity and collaboration. We need the interdisciplinary perspective from various points of view, not just from an educational background, but also in terms of age and regional background and these topics. And third, it's the importance of transfer of information. I would like to take these findings and pass the word over to somebody, an expert who has worked very intensively on this report. And so I would like to give the floor to Abhishek Malhotra. He's assistant professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi, and he has collaborated on this significantly. Abhishek, can you share your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. As Peter said, I'm an assistant professor at the School of Public Policy, and I'm broadly interested in questions around technological innovation and the role of public policy in it, particularly in developing countries. So coming from that perspective, for me, again, as Javier said, it was very difficult to think of one key finding. But if I had to pick one, it would have to be the importance of capacity building. And to talk about that, I first want to step back a little bit and talk about why we want collaborative RD&D in the first place. So there are different rationales, right? So first, you might think of collaborative RD&D as a form of risk and cost sharing, because RD&D by its very nature is very cost intensive as well as highly uncertain. So by having multiple stakeholders, you can spread the costs and diversify the risks. Second, if you have complex problems, you need to integrate different perspectives and different expertises. Again, something that Javier highlighted, something like climate adaptation, for example, you might want to integrate knowledge from climate science, agricultural science, hydrology, public policy. So all of these elements have to come together. Third, it might be a form of diplomacy. So between different countries, it might be a way of building diplomatic ties. Fourth, it might be a way of, especially for developed countries, getting access to markets when collaborating, for example, with a developing country. And finally, for a developing country, it might be an opportunity to invest in knowledge and capacity building. And in a lot of ways, the success of the first four factors depends on success in the fifth one. So increased capacity on the part of a developing country partner can contribute highly to the success of all the other factors. And so it is key to having meaningful collaborative R&D across multiple partners when developing countries are involved. And that also points towards the importance of long-term engagement, because capacity building is not something that can occur overnight. It is a slow and long-term process. So you need to build human skills, you need to build institutions. So in developing countries, when often you have a context which is scarce in terms of data, which has weak institutions, you need to focus not only the outcomes of the RD&D, but also on the processes. You need to build in institutions and processes which will contribute not only to the particular project, but will also contribute in the longer term for the success and continuation and sustainability of other RD&D activities. And besides a long-term perspective, you also need to take a systemic perspective, because RD&D, particularly if you want to it to benefit society, is not only within the confines of research institutes. You also want to build effective linkages with policymakers, with standard setting organizations, for example, with the private sector, for example, all of which are often lacking in developing country contexts. So it is a key learning not only for developed countries, but also for developing countries to approach collaborative RD&D, not only in terms of the immediate outcomes, but also in terms of having this one long-term and second systemic perspective to build institutions and processes to ensure that you can benefit from all these positive outcomes of collaborative RD&D.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. I think this point is worth diving into a little deeper, but everybody's ideas, please hold them for a second and let's introduce the third speaker, because she's very important to rounding off the perspectives of the panel, she is a private sector participant. It has a very, how can I call this, a very popular role in the German debate, at least. We see her on events repeatedly. She's also part of the event we're holding next week on decarbonization, and it's my pleasure to welcome Renate Krammer to this panel. She's head of innovation at Uniper, one of the large German utilities in a strong process of decarbonization. She is from Austria originally, and Renate, I'd like to give the floor to you and ask what are your thoughts, having heard what your fellow panelists have been saying. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Peter. My name is Renate Krammer. I'm head of innovation within Uniper. Uniper is a large energy player, not only in Germany, but I would say we are doing business in 27 countries. And being a generator of electricity, our main goal, or one of our goals, is to be net zero carbon, at least within our European generation by 2035, which means that's even earlier than the targets that are out there. It's not easy, but we think we will reach our targets. So, it's very important that that we talk about climate technologies here, because this is really an important topic for all of the private sector out there, especially in the energy intensive companies. But Uniper is not only generating energy, but we are also trading in energy. We have sales and energy-related services. We saw that decarbonization is a very important topic quite a couple of years ago, and this was one of the main pillars of our innovation activities we are focusing on. So having heard, the presentation before, the statements of my colleagues here, well, actually, yes, I can emphasize one of the findings, which is that you said that the private sector involvement in the early stages of the technology cycle is limited, that we focus more on demonstration, incubation, commercialization, and diffusion phase. Yeah, that's correct. I think, at least for our sector, it is because most of our peer groups and Uniper itself traditionally didn't have an R&D function, because the R&D function wasn't necessary. It was a stable sector. There were some innovations going on, but most of the innovation came from OEMs, etc. So these OEMs might have been involved in all these R&D activities, but so it doesn't surprise me that this is one of the findings here. And actually, when we start to talk startups to R&D companies, etc., most of the cases, we are talking about solutions, and we are talking about asset-heavy products, etc., starting with a TRL around 6 or 7. And this is where the others stop their research activity more or less at TRL 5 to 6. I guess everybody doesn't know what this is, the TRL level about. So yeah, this means we are coming into the picture. We as Uniper and innovation are coming into the picture when we're talking about proof of concept, piloting, commercialization, and market introduction. I think, but this is also a very important role we have. And yes, I would say we could be, or the private sector could be included in that earlier on, because what we saw and experienced a couple of times is that it's very valuable. Because of our market knowledge, of the knowledge, the regulatorily differences in the country, we can see use cases and applications maybe R&D companies don't see at that point of time. And so we can help, pivot maybe solutions so that they are more yeah, practical, I would say, for the market, and that they have more impact to the market. And when talking especially about developing countries, I think it's also that some of the companies are even not aware about what's going on around the world in that field. And so maybe there should be more awareness. What kind of programs are there? What kind of technological breakthroughs are there, etc. So that's the first point. And the second point, I guess we will come back later on anyway, the investment side, the financial side. I think that the private sector, either in the role as, for instance, venture capital funds, where we are investors, or corporate venture capital, could and should play a very important role in financing, in risk sharing, etc. But I guess we will discuss that later on, and I will give, also speaking time to all the others here.
Thank you so much. These were three very, very valuable perspectives from all of you. Thank you. Let's draw upon these and have a look at some more specific steps that could be taken. I think this is interesting because all of what you have said, Abhishek took a very good perspective on the capacity building, and in particular for developing countries. Renate touched upon it as well, and Javier spoke about this interdisciplinary perspectives that are needed to tackle this. Now, if we take a little closer look at the key observations of the compilation, one of them was that a large number of these collaborations focus on climate technology RD&D in general, but only a limited number are actually funding hardware. And a lot of systems we're talking about in climate technology are hardware systems, which are capital intensive, which take a very long time to develop, which are not suitable for venture capital, usually, or many of them are not, which is the reason why so much cleantech R&D in various TRLs, so technology readiness levels, for those who don't deal with this every day, Renate has raised the point. Many of these systems starve or dry up in one of the valleys of death. So clean tech development goes in certain innovation stages, as most of you know, and especially in hardware, long-term capital-intensive hardware, valleys of death are critical, and it takes capacity building, and it takes often international collaboration for these cross-border systems to be designed very carefully. Also designed between, we see this in a lot of debates right now on hydrogen and other systems, between developing and industrialized countries in order to work. So my question back to you would now be, and the floor is open to all of you, which steps could be taken, drawing upon the key lessons from the report, to sort of improve the engagement of developing countries in this process and to get more of these climate technology projects off the ground? Are there any comments on this?
Peter, if I may?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, and then Renate.
I want to example through MI. Since I'm the vice chair, I want to highlight the importance to be part of this organization for developing countries. Chile is a developing country, and for us being part of this organization has helped us to put ourselves in a point of reference in relation to the world and to identify those areas that we must advance and those where we can contribute. And that begins by understanding what are the main goals and why, which are the main processes that we have to follow to achieve these goals. So if I can give the example of MI, 5 years ago, we have a really ambitious goal that was to double the investment in clean energy innovation. So starting on that point, we have to define which steps should we follow to achieve that, and that's where the missions were created. And the mission has a really clear process to achieve the goals that are first detecting the problems to be solved, setting the goals, and those goals should be ambitious, real, but measurable. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Also to keep in mind, important to detect where are the milestones or the turning points, so you can check or revise your goals during the develop of that mission. The second point will be to create partnerships and collaboration. And we know that working in alliances with is key, because it helps the missions to deliver, not just to think, but deliver specific outcomes. And these alliances should include technical policy experts, knowledge partners, alliance with the global community, and especially the private sector to generate coalitions and also to generate demand. So we think that alliances are really, really important. And as a last point, the methodology, it's key. So one of the each mission has a blueprint that has to follow to achieve the goal. So if I can summarize the methodology in a few steps, it will be set an overall goal, generate a roadmap, generate an action plan, implement and review and maintain those goals, that action plan, and that the goals should be constantly reviewed through data that must be constantly collected. And I think when you analyze that data step by step, you can be humble and maybe change that goal, or maybe add more contributors for your mission. And I think that's why the methodology and have a pathway is so important. And that's why we have been really a good participant of mission innovation, and we had take a lot of benefits because we have worked in alliance with a lot of stakeholders. So I think that's for us as a developing country. I think, as I say, working in collaboration with a concrete organization has been really a key factor for us.
Thank you so much, Javier. We have attended a couple of events with Chile representative participation over the past year, and the path is impressive. The potential is huge in Chile for various technologies. And so as you went through your comments, I was sort of ticking all boxes in my head, because you were coming from data-driven on milestone planning, on collaborative setup partnerships. So you already mentioned a couple of important points. Renate had raised her hand. You want to add something to this discussion, right? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Because Peter, I think you mentioned, and I briefly touched the point already as well, that when talking about investment, that it's not that easy to draw investments in asset-heavy developments, because the innovation cycle of asset-heavy developments don't match the investment cycle of VC funds, for instance. And so there's a gap in between it. But I think the wind is changing. The situation is improving, because big spenders, so to say, international funds like the Bill Gates Fund or Bill Gates and Elon Musk Fund, they are, they have so deep pockets, I would say, that they are able to invest in that really early stage development. And that's a good thing. And I think more and more will follow. Also, companies who have a very high pressure to decarbonize, like big oil majors out there, because they will see, okay, we need new technologies. And the International Energy Agency, for instance, also said that about 30 to 50% of the technologies we will need for climate change are not here yet, or are in the early stages. So we will need that money. So that's the first point, and I think it's changing, but it's changing not fast enough, because being an investor, you always need a return. So I think it must be a cooperation of public funding and the share of public funding and private funding. And I think it's also important that the public funding, for instance, in the European Union, that it's easier to tap into that funding when you're working together, for instance, with developing countries. So, and another thing which is sometimes could be improved, for most of the companies and venture capital funds, etc., to invest, they need a legal entity. So the question is, how hard can you set up a legal entity so that you can, talk about IP rights, who is doing what, etc. So I think there are certain things that could be improved, and to speed up the RD&D efforts in developing country as well. But some of the problems are not really only problems of the developing, less developed country or developing country and the more developed country. They are somehow a challenge we are facing everywhere.
Thank you so much, Renate. I mean, if should the tech team, the UNFCCC tech team, think about releasing a press statement on this, I would draw upon your sentence, "The wind is changing," and make this the headline, and then go with the details below. Abhishek, asking you for a brief comment on this, and we'll come to the next topic soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah, a very brief comment on this from my side. So one of the issues with collaborative RD&D, particularly when you're thinking about cross-border collaborative RD&D, is as soon as you are close to commercialization, nobody wants to do it together anymore, because then the issue becomes of intellectual property and everybody wants to do it themselves. And so that is one big issue that is very difficult to navigate and to address. But one form of collaboration that is emerging and that might become even more important in the future as global value chains are emerging and technologies are more and more complex and need complementary capabilities from different countries, is thinking about collaborations in different parts of the value chain. So, for example, a cell manufacturer of lithium-ion batteries based out of Europe or North America might want to work with an automobile manufacturer based out of a developing country with a more tropical climate, because the battery system might need to be adapted to those particular climatic and driving conditions. And so you can think about cross-value chain collaborations emerging, which might be mutually beneficial and which can also drive R&D and innovation in these technologies. So perhaps what Javiera said about integrating different actors right from the beginning. So having different stakeholders from R&D institutes, from the private sector, from different geographies, as well as people who understand the market, that can help in identifying these strategically viable opportunities for RD&D collaboration.
Thank you so much, Abhishek. I think you raised an extremely important point, which we come across all the time. It's not so distinctly stressed in the report, but it's the intellectual property side and it's the commercialization. This is a big problem, for example, in the German university or R&D laboratory system, to give a national example, because there are no clear pathways oftentimes for high impact projects to then be commercialized. In the United States, completely different system, for example, in many other countries as well. I would like to ask everybody in the audience to already gather their questions, and I'd like to share, as we've stated in the agenda, a brief overview on findings from a survey we've just completed on the technological systems, because I think they will be important, since a lot of the climate technology R&D or RD&D areas are interconnected. We've got sector coupling in the long term almost everywhere. Almost all of these technologies are connected. And before taking questions from the audience and the tech members, of course, I would like to share some of these results which we've come across. Now, we completed this survey with people from all types of backgrounds who work on clean tech and investment decisions, the energy industry, the public sector, and of course the finance and the laboratory R&D side. And there were a couple of interesting results that we've just released in this World Economic Forum publication. And one is we looked at the next 5 years. And here there was a clear priority for clean electricity generation, which was still #1 choice, followed by energy storage and then decarbonization technologies. Whereas in the second half of this decade, zero carbon fuels in various types take over #1 spot, and industrial conversion processes and long-term storage come in as second and third. We were a little surprised that systems like carbon capture and storage, also new nuclear type of technologies were ranked fairly low, but maybe you might want to take a look at this later. There were a lot of drivers and systems beyond 2030, but we thought two of these trends were particularly interesting to see, and I would like to briefly show this to you in a second slide that sort of makes this a little more visible. You can see how between the next 5 years and the following 5, electricity generation, which is first number 1, decreases in relevance significantly, while zero carbon fuels just ranked 5 or 6 becomes number 1. And both of these segments are very much dependent on international RD&D, are very much depending on collaborations between developing countries and industrialized countries. And as Renate will be able to confirm, and Javier and Abhishek as well, these segments are very capital intensive. They need very firm and predictable investment frameworks to attract the investment. They need investors, or sometimes in the early stages, funds like Renate has mentioned, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, or others who bring in patient capital, and they need public support. Few energy systems as large as these have been able to make it without significant public support in the first field, as all of you know. So taking what you said on engaging developing countries more intensively, and again asking our kind audience to put questions to these excellent panelists, I would first of all like to give the word back to you three one more time, and maybe also integrate Stephen if you like, on how you see this major technology trend. Do you, in your countries, in your regions, from your educational perspective or your working background perspective, identify certain segments you consider specifically important? Are you putting certain emphasis on some systems from a technological point of view? Anyone?
Well, actually, I can. Okay, go ahead.
No, so I have been the first for the last 2 times, so please come jump in.
Renate, please go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, some comments on the findings. Well, actually, I find it interesting that the zero carbon fuels are R&D priorities in the second half of our decade now, because they are already an important topic. And I think basically we need to strengthen the efforts now so that we will solve that problem. But of course, I mean, if you have to make a ranking, clean energy and industrial decarbonization will be on top of the agenda. And the second thing is about CCS, you mentioned it, that you are surprised that it's ranked so low. And I think this is because of the lack of a business case behind it. There are already carbon capture technologies out there, some for a very long time already, but most of it is expensive. And as long as there are more inexpensive offsetting or removal alternatives out there, like certificates and CO2, and the CO2 certificate price is not high enough, other solutions will be favored. And I also think that, and you mentioned it, that the ecosystems or industry sectors like energy and agriculture are getting more and more related, because you can see electricity is the new soil when we talk about, for instance, vertical farming, which contributes to biodiversity and reduction or recycling of CO2. And also think that certain technology, also vertical farming is not a climate technology, is also a chance for developing countries, because here we are talking about how to build the world. They are still very energy intensive, so it means they are quite expensive, but I think a lot more will come in the future. And I also think that we will see developments, especially emerging in developing countries, because here we have maybe different problems or maybe a different thinking how to solve some problems we even don't think about. So I also see in that international cooperation, value chains, like Abhishek said, value chains are getting even more international than they are already. So this is very important as well.
Thank you, Javier. You want to add some comments right away?
Okay. Yes, I was turning my mic on. So I love that thing that the point that Renate just raised about that there's so many problems that we haven't seen yet. So that's why we have to set long-term vision. I think that's the key thing, because if you have a main goal in the long term, maybe all these questions will be able to integrate that goal. But I think setting a big goal is the key element for speed up the process of getting more RD&D in the countries. And I think coming from the public sector, I think regulation is key as well, to have common standards around the world, to have I don't know, to be more collaborative in that way. I think we have not collaborated as much as we should in regulation. And I think we should set like global standards which help us to move on faster.
I could not agree more. And again, I have to throw in an example from Europe, from Germany in particular, where the industry is pushing the government to finally create a stable investment framework, so that these long-term capital-intensive investments can be made by industry participants. And something else I'd like to mention, Renate was touching upon it, the low ranking of CCS as an example. Just the fact that something does not have a business case yet, like green hydrogen in many applications, by the way, doesn't prevent it from becoming a hype, from becoming something that's politically desired and that's supported with enormous funding across the field in several countries. So this is another point, you know, and then coming back finally to the compilation again, to some of the results of the compilation, but maybe an additional thought. Abhishek, if you still have a comment on this, please feel free to share it. But energy investments are never purely commercial or economic decisions. It's always political, and it brings about a lot of psychology sometimes in hypes and trends, which have the risk of running into technological lock-ins, of course, as we've seen over the past century in many cases. So a very interesting exchange of thoughts with all of you. I'd like to finally, as we're not receiving any questions yet, I'm being asked by the tech team to ask the audience again. Don't be shy, feel free to post your questions, but in the meantime, let me touch upon some of the findings which Stephen has stressed in his presentation from the compilation. And I thought particularly interesting the high level political buy-in, which is important, the joint ownership and funding of these projects. You know, you need to lose something. You need some flesh in the game sometimes. If it's a free ride for participants, I've seen it in R&D projects in the European space quite a bit. If it's just funding and no own commitment by participants, by parts of the consortia, it's not the same dedication as it is if they have something to lose in it. And I think an initiative's design with the technology, this is why I also wanted to bring up these technology segments, is very important. The more intelligently the design of the R&D effort is fabricated and adapted to the kind of technological system that's supposed to be developed with a long-term perspective, because some of these, let's face it, some of these technologies that are not out there will take decades, or at least more than 1 decade, to be commercialized. And so the smarter and more adaptable your R&D collaboration scheme is adapted to that, I think, the better. Now, time for famous last words, because we're running towards the end of the session. I was told to make sure to close this on time. I'd like to maybe give the word to Stephen once more, because you have given this this good overview of the findings. Maybe you can share some thoughts on what the panelists have said discussing these findings. Would you be so kind?
Very happy to, Peter, and I agree with you. If there is going to be a press release, then I think listening to the winds of change is an entirely appropriate heading. But this has been such a rich discussion. The panelists have added so much here. I don't know where to start. Thinking in terms of the ecosystem, thinking of value chains, the importance of data, measuring in real time, correcting course where necessary. But also, and perhaps this is a bit easier when we're talking about predominantly public entities, sharing data and assessments with each other so that other collaborations can learn from them. Clear governance, that's been mentioned also by Renata, and it's very important. The realities faced by the private sector. The private sector will participate for its own reasons, and or not, and it's very important that project designers understand that entirely. But it's a very exciting area. The FCA findings, this will be my final comment. It is interesting that we're moving to the priorities for zero emissions transport. There's been such tremendous progress with renewables in recent years. And in a sense, as the targets become more ambitious for abatement, then every incremental percentage of abatement gets harder, and RD&D has to kind of reach further into more difficult areas. So that's what we're seeing, and that's why these collaborations are so important. So thank you all for a terrific discussion.
Thank you so much, Stephen. We have 3 minutes left, and finally questions are coming up, so we need to take them, of course. But it was a great comment. By the way, in the chat you find a link to a trailer and the registration for a clean tech panel we'll be holding next week with Renate Kammer and a lot of international experts on decarbonizing industry. We're just looking at steel, cement, and these kind of things. I need to mention this because Andrea was so kind. So I'd like to give the word to Hamza Merabet with a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the panelists. Thanks for the presentation. I have a comment. About one kind of research and development project or program, which is LIPRI, which means Research and Innovation Call for long-term partnerships between African and European researchers on the field of renewable energy and other domains, including climate change. It's important to mention that there was a great interest from the African countries by financing the project and by the researchers also, with an increased participation from the African institutions, with a big number of proposals and with a strong participation of the private sector also. This call followed other calls such as FOSC, which means food system and climate, and also SysFood, which means sustainable food and system, which are also research and innovation programs co-funded by Mediterranean countries. What's also important to mention is that these calls focus on mitigation more than adaptation. And also I want to say that the African researchers need more time for research and innovation with this sort of cooperation project on mitigation and adaptation, and also for the technology project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this comment. We're running out of time, unfortunately. I'd like to, because we promised to close sharp, I'd like to thank all of you for this great participation. I do not need final remarks and wrapping this up because Stephen has done this for me kindly, probably better than I could do it. Thank you, everyone. I hope to stay in contact, and thank you to all the panelists and the tech members for taking the time and this discussion. It's 3 p.m. CET. We're closing here. Have a good day and a successful continuing tech meeting. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And thank you once again to everybody who participated in this fantastic discussion. But now, colleagues, we return to more prosaic matters. We return to our agenda. And we're turning now to agenda item number 5. This is corresponding with annotations 44 to 47 of the annotated agenda, and indeed it is the inputs of the TEC into the global stocktake under the Paris Agreement on matters related to climate technology development and transfer. The TEC will be invited to take note of the information provided. I think we're all very familiar with the background of this item, so I would invite our colleague from the Secretariat, Mr. Florin Vadu, to take the floor. Florin, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I would like to talk to you today briefly about the global stocktake under the Paris Agreement, with a focus on the contribution by the Technology Executive Committee. I know that many of you are familiar already with the global stocktake process, but given the delays which are happening now everywhere with due to the global pandemic, I would use one slide to reintroduce this process to you and insist on new deadlines and new timeline for various steps in the process. Yeah. As you know, the global stocktake will not start up to the end of the year. Yeah. With its first component. So we're in a phase where we're preparing the work of the first global stocktake, which will end in 2023. Here we have a couple of mandates from the CMA. The first one is to update the sources of information for the global stocktake. I will now refer to this decision 19 CMA1, which contains the modalities for the global stocktake and sources of inputs. And there's a paragraph there which is saying that the sources of inputs which were agreed would be revised with an attempt to complement them before the information collection start, the session before the information collection start. And this is a paragraph which is for SABSTA. So consequently, we'll have in 1 month some discussions about updating the sources of inputs under SABSTA. Then the SABSTA and SBI chair have been requested to develop some guiding questions. And these questions are for all components of the global stocktake. And you would see immediately the 3 components of the global stocktake, as well as to identify opportunities for learning by doing when assessing collective progress. Yeah. This work would be summarized in a non-paper the chair of SABSTA and SBI plan to make available to parties in May, June this year. Yeah. As you know already, there are some mandates requesting the constituted bodies to do something in the global stocktake, and the major one is an invitation to provide the synthesis report in their area of expertise, and the technology committee was invited to provide this report. And if you are waiting for a specific invitation for you to provide your input, this will come relatively late. It's about 3 months before the technical assessment starts, but it will be quite a general invitation to all those organizations and entities providing input to the global stocktake. Yeah. In addition to the TEC synthesis report, we have other 8 synthesis reports invited from constituted bodies, as well inputs from international and UN agencies, regional organizations, and non-party stakeholders. And we have 4 synthesis reports which are to be prepared by the Secretariat under the guidance of the co-facilitators of the technical dialogue. after the inputs are prepared, there is an opportunity to organize some webinars to explain the input, so that the discussions during the technical dialogues will be focused on the findings rather than on questions for clarifications on how the input has been provided. Yeah. Now the mandate talks about the secretariat organizing these webinars, but I would say this could be extended to the constituted bodies doing this work. So if TEC provides an input, it would be useful for them to organize a webinar to explain their input before the technical dialogues. The first technical dialogue is scheduled to take place in the summer of 2022. And the second, you have it at the COP. And then the last technical dialogue is taking place in the summer of 2023. So this is a technical assessment part of the global stocktake. There are many inputs, and some key inputs would be the inputs from IPCC, which are now delayed, as you may know. The working group reports, and then the synthesis report of the 6th assessment cycle of IPCC. Guiding questions are to be developed before the technical dialogue, so there could be additional guiding questions coming up later on, and webinars can also be organized before the technical dialogue. As you may know, the global stocktake has 3 thematic areas: mitigation, adaptation, means of implementation, of course, finance, technology, and capacity building. And we are considering also response measure, loss and damage aspects of, and equity. In parallel with the technical dialogues, parties are negotiating and discussing how the dialogues are going and providing guidance. We would not know at this point in time if we will have a joint contact group of SAPST and SBI before the first technical dialogue would happen. So this would be in Glasgow if it's happening, or we start with joint contact groups only after the technical dialogue started. When the technical dialogue finishes, there would be a synthesis report summarizing all the work done here, which will be considered by the final meeting of joint contact group, where you may have decisions, a draft decision proposed for consideration by the CMA, and the last phase, consideration of outputs, where we have a string of high-level events, roundtable, to consider the output. So this is in a nutshell, you know, there are the modalities of the global stocktake with the corresponding delays. Now, potential contribution by the TEC. What is expected, as I said, a synthesis report, and you have the paragraph there where the TEC was invited to provide this synthesis report. Now, I made this observation probably before talking to you, that the contribution of the TEC is likely to be considered at each technical dialogue. So your contribution can be divided in 3 installments. Yeah? And if this would be the case, it's your decision, of course. You would need to provide something in March 2022, August 2023, and March 2022. Okay, these are reverse here, sorry. March, August 2022, yeah, and March 2023. What information is needed? And I understand that this is the main question you have to ask the Secretariat at this point in time. What do you need? What is to be included in the synthesis report? Yeah, my answer is information for taking stock of the implementation of the Article 10 of the Paris Agreement to assess collective progress on technology development and transfer. Yeah, and this information should be at aggregated level. So the global stocktake is looking only to aggregated level, which means no individual groups of parties information. Yeah, and you would have to decide how you do that, how you look at different trends in R&D, as you were discussing earlier, without naming and shaming anybody. And then it could be backward looking on what has been done, as well as forward looking as what is intended to be done. Now, the second guidance on what is needed in your synthesis report comes from the information identified in paragraph 36 of 19 CMA1. And here I would, of course, you can look to all the sub-bullets of that paragraph. And you would know that some of the information is not necessarily standalone for technology. I mean, like the overall effect of implementing NDCs, but you may look to something from the reporting on NDCs, which is linked to technology transfer, the same thing on state of adaptation efforts and so on. If you do work on technologies for adaptation and you may do this work even jointly with other constituted bodies. Yeah? Some they may be specific to technologies, like when there are references to barriers and challenges, including for technologies. Yeah? And then there is a reference to your output from the periodic assessment of the technology mechanism. So this, I would say, 36F, it's specific to technologies. And then good practices, experience, and potential opportunities to enhance cooperation on technology development and transfer would be something which is providing you guidance what is needed in the synthesis report. Other guidance could come from what other constituted bodies are doing, how they are responding to the same mandate. Yeah? And you have here the adaptation committee, which is waiting for the guiding questions from the SB chairs, and they will discuss at the next meeting the outline of the synthesis report. I hope they would also decide how to do this in one installment, several installments, and so on. And how to engage with other parties. As I illustrated on my previous slides, there may be areas where the other bodies are also working and parties are providing information on this. The CGE would potentially address gaps in F&G, which I've illustrated before, drawing on previous work of CGE. The guidance we have at this point in time doesn't necessarily say that you should do specific work for the GST. You could decide also to draw only on whatever is in your work program, but you could also decide to address areas, specific areas which would be linked to the GST. And the list to develop countries expert group is planning to provide information on implementation of maps, and lesson learned and good practices. Now, other guidance which may come to you is from the specific guiding questions which are referred to in the decision. And as I said, non-paper by the Substance SBI chair would provide something on this. But looking realistically to this guidance, I think it cannot be very detailed. Yeah, I just put here like two questions which are linked to, what is the progress in achieving your long-term vision, referring Article 10.1, and opportunities and good practices which are also mentioned in the input from the decision I illustrated before. So I would not expect that much from specific, because it would be quite difficult to agree on very specific questions. Yeah, listening to the discussion you just had before with the panel, you could imagine immediately, things like what's happening with the green hydrogen. There's lots of expectations that technology would contribute substantially to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Yeah, we have heard yesterday the leaders of the world talking about these things. Yeah, and the progress in CCS or lack of progress in CCS, decarbonization of the energy sector, industry, all those things you were talking before, from a technology perspective, how they are progressing. But I would not think that you would get that level of detail saying green hydrogen, for example, or CCS. So that's my short presentation, and the floor is back to you. I'm here for answering questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Florin, for that very helpful presentation. And colleagues, the floor is now open for comments from TEC members. So if there are TEC members who wish to comment on the presentation or who may have questions, Stig, please.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you very much for this presentation. And are we also commenting on the way forward or just the presentation?
Comments on the way forward are also most welcome.
Okay. There's one question that Florin was touching on. What is the Article 10.6, I guess? The question is this 10.6 for the TEC22 or for some other body to do, like the Secretariat, for instance? But my initial thought was that the approach taken by the adaptation committee seems like a very good way forward, and that we should wait this discussion in detail until we have the questions by the two chairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stig. Are there other TEC members who have questions or comments? Well, perhaps as we wait for further questions, I could invite Florin to address Stig's comment about, if I heard correctly, Article 10.6, and whether this is to be done by the TEC or the Secretariat. Article 10.6, for those who don't follow this on a daily basis, support, including financial support, shall be provided to developing country parties for the implementation of this article, including for strengthening cooperative action on technology development and transfer at different stages of the technology cycle, with a view to achieving a balance between support for mitigation and adaptation. The global stocktake referred to in Article 14 shall take into account available information on efforts related to support on technology development and transfer for developing country parties. So that's Article 10.6. Florin, would you be able to address that, please?
You see, the global stocktake is designed as a process with multiple inputs. Yeah. It's not a process which is trying to attribute responsibility for a topic to only one input provider, yeah, one information source. Yeah. So it accepts inputs coming from various sources. Yeah. And this leads to the conclusion that there could be overlaps. Yeah. And this is why you have the technical dialogue, where you would address this guiding question on Article 10.6, let's say, if there is one on Article 10.6, with inputs coming from various sources. So you would have the Working Group 3 report of IPCC talking about technology transfer. You would have the input from the Technology Executive Committee. You will have the synthesis reports on NDCs and the biennial transparency reports, which also can have some, information coming. And the idea is that everything comes together in that discussion, and then you document what all those, information sources were telling you about progress or lack of progress on implementing this article. Yeah. it's up to you to decide how you want to do it. I mean, if you want to do it, yeah, and what you want to do. This is why in the presentation I've picked examples to show that you may decide to work with the Standing Committee on Finance on this, or another committee, yeah, as you usually do. I mean, this is not something new. I mean, you have been collaborating with the Standing Committee on Finance, yeah, and other committees, yeah, and provide your input, and you have to discuss how do you want to provide your input. For us, from the global stock take perspective, is that who is taking responsibility of the input provided, yeah? Because at the end, somebody will have to defend as experts in the technical dialogue their input, yeah? So we do not suggest that you should repeat input by others where you are not the main source, yeah? Because then you'll be asked to defend why somebody else said something, which shouldn't be your business, yeah? You should only try to defend what you did as a committee and your work, yeah? Where you would have the expertise and knowledge to explain what the input is, yeah? So I think this is how, in general, I see things working, and one should not be scared for overlaps, but should look to understand what others are providing. So to find a place where you have the expertise to say something, and you can maximize your effort. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florin. Are there other tech colleagues who wish to comment or who may have any questions? May have comments both on the information that we've just heard and also potential ways forward. Hamza, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Just I have a question. As presented in the diagram, I don't see in the input the national communications and the annual update report. My question is, will we use them in this global update?
I'm sorry, Hamza, the sound was not great. Which reports are you referring to?
The national communications, or the inventories of the GHG inventories and the biennial update reports.
Thank you.
Of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. And next I see Ditrum, please.
Yeah, maybe also a question to Florin on, for example, you mentioned the working group 3 of the IPCC. So how would the process be? Would we just read this and then discuss among the tech, or would we have a meeting with the experts from IPCC to discuss that specifically?
Thank you, Ditrum, for that question. As I can see no other colleagues asking for the floor, perhaps, Florin, I could turn to you with those two questions.
Thank you, Stefan. No, the first one I could not understand exactly what it was all about. I mean, I understood only this about the GHG inventories and other reports coming from parties, no? And what is the relationship between the tech work and these reports, yeah? Is it?
My understanding was that Hamza was asking, but Hamza, please correct me. I see you're asking for the floor again. Please, Hamza.
Yeah. Just I want to say that as input, could we use the national communication data and biennial update report in this global spot day?
Yeah. Now. As I said, the information has to be at collective level. Yeah. So somebody needs to do the aggregation of this information, the analysis of this information. Yeah. You can look also at TNAs. It's the same thing. I mean, it's not part of the Paris Agreement, but is still information from parties. Yeah. And if the TEC is doing any analysis which are summarizing and analyzing this information, yeah, it's useful. You can put it in your input. It's your analysis, your findings, your conclusions. You can defend them and all these things. Yeah. The Secretariat, when doing the reports I mentioned before, the 4 reports I mentioned before, for the under the guidance of the co-facilitators of the technical dialogue, yeah, could coordinate with TEC and the other constituted bodies not to do an analysis if it's already done somewhere else. Yeah. So for example, in the case of GHG emissions, the call was to look to the previous 2 analyses done by the Secretariat, because they are done at every second year, yeah, from the biennial transparency reports, and summarize them somehow, the last 2, yeah. So there was already this idea that the reports by the co-facilitators have to be coordinated somehow with other work, yeah. So that's the response. Of course, you have to have it in your work program. You have to have a mandate to do this, all these things which are specific to your work. Now, the other question was with the working group 3 of IPCC, and what was how you coordinate with the working group 3, and if you can discuss with them. What was the question? Sorry.
I think Dietrich was asking if the TEC wanted to coordinate with the IPCC, how it would do so. But again, Dietrich, if I'm misinterpreting you, please correct me.
Yeah, that's correct. So basically, if there, for example, if it would be appropriate to have like a meeting with the IPCC experts on this, to discuss what kind of conclusions the TEC can draw from that recommendations given in the report.
There are a couple of things here which are linked to procedures. Yeah, so IPCC does not talk about these things until they don't finish them. Yeah. Any interaction with the external world is, it's a firewall. Yeah, you cannot talk to the experts. They go to their lead author meetings and they write the reports, and then they have the comments from governments and all these things. Yeah, but they do not interact with other entities until it's finished in the process of writing. It's like trying to separate the influence from outside with the scientific world of the experts. After the work is done, and if they have the chapter on technology, yes, you can work with working group 3. You can invite the co-chairs of the working group 3 to your meetings and talk about, and you can get lead authors from them and so on. But this brings us to the discussion of sequencing. Yeah, how you provide your input. Yeah, as it is linked to other inputs, and and this is why I've said you, as the adaptation committee, may engage in a scoping of your synthesis report. Yeah. Well, when you do that exercise, you have to look to see what do we want to present for March 2022 to be available in June 2022. And if you want to do something with IPCC, you have to do it after the report is ready. Yeah, the report will be ready for the second technical dialogue, so it's already narrowing down to the last technical dialogue. Yeah, so because you have to discuss with them, prepare something after the discussion, no? Prepare some kind of input. Yeah, and that's the most important things. I call it the narrative. What would be the narrative on technology you want to convene in the global stocktake, and how this would be built? I mean, if you look to article, the article 10, I would say the article 10.1, the shared vision is the last one because to reach that shared vision, you have to do the others which are underneath. Yeah. So maybe you keep the shared vision for the end, the last technical dialogue, when you reflect on how this shared vision has been reached, yeah, and then you look to more of the other parts, the innovation part, the cooperative action part, the support part, and then all of those will lead to the implementation of the shared vision. And then you have to think how you do this. I also think you have to also talk to the other groups. I mean, if it's the support part and it's linked to finance, you have to talk to whoever is, like the standing committee. If the standing committee plans to do it at the third technical dialogue, or first technical dialogue, so you can coordinate with them a bit, yeah. But the answer is yes, but you have to figure out how, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Stig, please.
Thank you. And I agree with what you said, Florian, about the sequencing, but luckily, at least as far as I'm aware of, the leading authors of the technology part is previous TEC members, and also some of the review editors are previous TEC members. So I think that we can invite Gabriel or Helene to, or even Nagmeldin, to do a status presentation at the next meeting, and then we can follow up when the IPCC report is finalized, because both Gabriel and Helene is fully aware of both work of the TEC and also how they appropriately can interact with the TEC during the work of the IPCC. So that's my suggestion, to invite three or maybe one to.
Sorry to interrupt you. I agree with what you say. Yeah, I mean, Helen McCormick and Gabriel Branco, they both are members in the TEC, and they know. Yeah, what I wanted to say, they cannot tell you what the conclusions are.
No, I understand.
Because that's only when it's agreed and all this thing. Yeah. The work, how everything is that's fine. I mean, they can talk about those things, but they cannot guarantee that these are the conclusions, and you would have to analyze these conclusions, because this is not possible until the STM is adopted and the report is adopted. This is how it is. Otherwise, interaction, and they can come as IPCC. They can present their university or whatever. That's completely fine.
Okay. Yeah, no, I fully agree. I just think that some of us know these people and talk to them regularly, and some don't. So it will be a transparency thing also, that they will be presenting for the entire TEC at the same time, but not giving away any information that is not should not be made available publicly. So I fully agree on that.
Thank you, Stig. And I see in the chat that Deepram supports your proposal to invite certain IPCC colleagues to present a status update at the next TEC meeting. Are there any other TEC members who wish to reflect on that proposal, on the previous proposal from Stig that we adopt a similar approach to the adaptation committee in terms of essentially waiting for the guidance from the SB chairs, or indeed are there other comments on the presentation or perhaps questions that have arisen from this discussion? Seeing no requests from TEC members for the floor, I would like to invite observers now who may wish to comment on this agenda item. do not see any requests from observers for the floor. So in this item, we have been asked to take note of the information provided. I think we've certainly done that. We have also heard proposals to essentially wait for the SB Chair's guidance before taking any particular action, and also a proposal to invite certain IPC colleagues to address the TEC at its next meeting. For both of those proposals, I've not heard any different opinions, but the floor is still open. Seeing no requests for the floor, I take it then that we have taken note of the information provided, for which, Florine, thank you very much for the presentation and also engaging in the question and answer. And we have also resolved to wait for the guidance from the SB chairs and also to invite the mentioned IPCC colleagues to address the TEC at its next meeting. So thank you very much, colleagues, particularly Florine. And thank you for this discussion. So that concludes agenda item 5, colleagues, and we are almost exactly on time. So let us now take a 5-minute break, and we'll continue our business in 5 minutes from now. Thank you.
Welcome back, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for your very constructive engagement in our first part of the meeting. Let me proceed with the agenda item following on the scope for today, which is the first one is the item 7 on the agenda, which is other matters. We managed to consider a large part of the agenda agenda 7, which is the other matters yesterday, but we will be going back to one agenda item before proceeding into the next item on the agenda 7. The item that I would like to revisit is the items with regard to the district invitation. And also yesterday we discussed about this matter and asked for the sake of transparency, we would give the email that we have received. Myself as well as the chair of the TEC have received from Robbie, and the secretariat had kindly circulated that email. Also suggesting that might help us to discuss more about the invitation and finalize the task force that we might be able to engage in the upcoming 2 meetings of the district conference. So with that, I would also like to give a bit of background in terms of what are the events that we were invited. The first one is that is going to happen at the eve of the World Expo that is going to happen in October this year from 24th to 27th. That is focused on I would say on innovative financing mechanism for climate change response. And the second one is going to happen next year, early next year, from 17th to 19th of January, along with the 76th session United Nations Day as well. And that discussion the event will be focusing on acceleration in scaling up of climate technology development and transfer. So the first one, the first event that is going to take place in October this year would be focusing more on financing mechanisms for climate change response, and the second one is kind of a cross-cutting, I would say, at this point in time. So with regard to that, I would like to open the floor for any suggestions of how we move forward in engaging realistic events. The floor is open for TEC members. Proceed with the approach of engaging in these events, both in October as well as in January next year. And then I would kindly ask if for for the October session, which is focused more on support side of climate financing for climate change response. I would request if the task force on support could kindly lead us in organizing or in preparing for the event, of course, with the help from our secretariat as well. And the second one is a bit of more cross-cutting. Hence, I would ask if the task force on implementation or enabling environment could perhaps lead on that event. So I would like to present those two proposals on the table. The first one is the task force on support to lead the event for TEC with the support of the secretariat, of course. And the second one is the task force on and capacity building to lead on the second event. I see no members requesting for the floor. Therefore, I would assume that we would proceed in accordance with the arrangement that I have outlined as well. Thank you very much for your contribution on this and your positive engagement on this. And then before moving on to the next sub item under this agenda item, I would also like to request, we have a request coming from both the chair and myself got the request from Yango to make an intervention on their behalf. Hence, we would like to open the floor for Yango to make the statement.
Thank you so much, Chair, for the floor, and apologize again for the late confirmation of this intervention due to the email sending failure. And many thanks for the chairs and the TEC members understanding. Although I am here at TEC22 to represent WGC, I am also a Yango member, and I will be starting Yango's intervention today briefly on our joint efforts of our constituencies, and all the credits to the Yango members for their contribution towards this intervention. Thank you. On behalf of Yango, the official youth constituency of UNFCCC, would like to express our gratitude to the chairs and TEC members for the opportunity to be involved as observers and to provide our intervention. And more than 110 countries have signed on to become carbon neutral by 2050 and are expected to finalize their contributions at COP26 this November. And Yango and WGC support these countries that have the technology and experience collaborating with those in need of them in order to bring us all to carbon neutrality by 2050, and we fully support the implementation of the technology framework adopted at COP24. And the young people are the majority of the population in Global South. Indigenous people are the most relevant stakeholders in designing and implementing endogenous technologies, and women ensure the resilience and care of our societies, and therefore wish to be further included in more decision-making processes related to climate policies. Thank you, and I will now pass on the floor to our Yango delegates, Lorenzo and Will. Please take the floor.
Good day to all here in the meeting. I'm representing the Yango Observer Delegation to this meeting. Yango supports innovations in transforming climate technologies into economically feasible and socially acceptable interventions that do not infringe on fundamental human rights and do not exclude nor harm vulnerable groups. As a constituency, we encourage the opening of more opportunities for the participation of various stakeholders, especially youth and women, and gender involved in climate technology research and development. There is also a need for innovative ideas to attract more funding from the private sectors to facilitate the scalability and marketability of mature climate technologies, especially in underdeveloped and developing country markets. Passing it on to Will. So we believe the youth has an immense potential in our role as climate action advocates. As evidence, the youth has been a driving force behind new environmental policies across the globe, and we want to make sure our messages go viral. We have a can't stop, won't stop mentality that is powerful in its own right. We could be instrumental in furthering the development of climate technologies by taking an active part in policy construction and being included in decision-making processes to share mature climate technologies. On behalf of the entire Yongo constituency and our peers across the globe, we thank you for the opportunity to collaborate and to intervene today, and we wish the TEC to consider further increasing youth engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleague, from your presenting their priorities and willing to engage with the TEC on matters related to technology executive committees. And thank you very much. At this point in time, I would also like to note thanks to Yango. We are the Yango is also part of our task force group as well. So thank you for their contribution in town. Thank you very much. That I was the last part of the other matters, the agenda 7, which is to agree on the revision of the rules of procedures, including a provision of conflict of interest. Just to provide you a bit of background of where we are in terms of this issue. We recall that at the end of year 2009, Commission's Office of Internal Oversight Services conducted an assessment to undertake the adequacy and effectiveness of the reports for the governance, management, and control in this manner. And then they found that harmonization in the rules of procedure of the constituted body is required to ensure there is consistency in application of the code of ethics. In particularly, they have also reported and observed that the rules of procedures of several bodies, including the TEC, do not contain provisions to safeguard against potential conflict of interest situations in working of these bodies. Hence, we would like to with this the UN of Oversight Services, the TEC is invited therefore to consider the revision of our rules of procedures and to include the provisions for conflict of interest. Hence, according to the paragraph 61 of the rules of procedures of the TEC, the rules of procedures may be amended by the TEC by consensus, and to be effective must approve formally by the conference of the parties. Pending formal approval, the TEC may decide to apply the amendment provisionally. With that in mind, let me invite the Secretariat colleague, Ms. Tanvi, to provide and introduce the issue. The floor is open for Tanvi. Tanvi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Tanvi Mani, and I work within the Legal Affairs Division at the UNFCCC. As you've already heard, the United Nations Office of Internal Oversight conducts an independent internal audit of all UN agencies and organizations. The 2019 audit of the support and services to the UNFCCC constituted bodies included procedural, substantive, and institutional matters, as well as work planning, monitoring, and reporting. So based on this audit, one of the recommendations that was made was to harmonize the provisions for safeguarding against potential conflict of interests. With this in mind, the proposed wording that we have proposed to the different constituted bodies was based on the standard wording for a conflict of interest provision that was used within also the WIM XCOM rules of procedure. So this provision reads, committee members must promptly disclose and recuse themselves from any deliberations or decision making where their personal or financial interests may be affected in order to avoid a conflict of interest or the appearance of one. This provision with this same wording was considered by the Adaptation Committee and accepted as is, and they amended their rules of procedure to include this provision as well. The consultative group of experts also considered this wording, and they included it with a slight modification where they removed the word deliberations, but only stuck to decision making. The same wording has also been considered by the KCI, and they plan to consider it further at their next meeting. And the PCCB as well will consider it at their upcoming meeting in June. Apart from these constituted bodies, several other constituted bodies already have a provision on conflict of interest. This includes the WIM XCOM, the Kyoto Protocol Compliance Committee, as well as the CDM Executive Board and the JISC as well. Some constituted bodies don't have rules of procedure, and therefore they consider different options, like perhaps an oath of service. But essentially, this is the standard wording that has been implemented across the board within the UNFCCC constituted bodies. And yeah, in case you have any further questions or clarifications, happy to address those as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanvi, and I hope I'm not breaking now. With that presentation, let me invite the TEC members, and I see Stig. Stig, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you very much for this explanation and presentation. Can you explain and give some example what I understand financial interest, but what would constitute personal interest in this context? Thank you.
Thank you, Stig. I have Ship, so I'll take 2 questions, and then we'll pass to Tanvi for clarification or answers. Ship, you have the floor.
Thanks, Maria, and thank you, Tanvi, for that explanation. Really helpful. Would it be possible to see the two different versions that were approved? I think you said one by the WIM and the other by the AC. Would it be possible to put that in the chat? Because I kind of missed what the slight difference was, and I'd like to just be able to look at it if that's possible. That'd be helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, Shiv. With that, I asked the Secretariat colleague if they can put that in the chat box or could share it on the screen, and then I pass the floor to Tanvi for the clarifications that was asked by Steve. Tanvi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. So essentially, a personal conflict of interest is self-determined. So an individual would decide when there seems to be a conflict of interest in the carrying out of his or her duties. But for example, the Code of Ethics that was approved and endorsed by the Bureau, and which is the version as of March 2020, has a sort of overarching description of this. And I can read that out, which is, for the purpose of this code, a conflict of interest constitutes any current circumstances or interests that could lead a person to reasonably believe that an individual's objectivity in carrying out his or her duties and responsibilities may be in question, or that an unfair advantage may be created for any person or organization. So examples of these could include unwarranted preferential treatment to any group or persons, desisting from using their role as a means to seek private gain. And so, yeah, but it's entirely up to the individual. It's to determine what would be a conflict of interest in their execution of a particular role within the committee.
Thank you, Tanvi, for that clarification on that, on the question of skip. Would it be helpful? Yes, Andrea is typing for us. So maybe we would have a look at that and then we'll. It might be helpful if Andrea could yes, thank you very much. That Andrea has said that it is from the first one is from AC, and it says, if I can read, it says committee members must promptly disclose and rescue themselves from any deliberations or decision making where their personal or financial interest may be affected in order to avoid a conflict of interest or the appearance of one. And the CGE, if I can read, they have said the CGE is the members of the consultative group of experts must promptly disclose and rescue themselves from a decision making where their personal or financial interest may be affected in order to avoid a conflict of interest or the appearance of one. So the difference is CGE just removed the word deliberations on. So with that, Shiv, do you want to take the floor again?
No, that's really helpful. I just wanted to see it on the screen. Thank you to the secretary for that.
Thank you. So, colleagues, we have two kind of language before us for us to revise the rules of procedures accordingly. Hence, I would kindly ask you to react on these two proposals. If you may have any questions or thoughts on this, the floor is open on this. I have Steve.
Yes, thank you. I'm okay with either of them. But can I ask another clarifying question, which is not relevant for myself, but if we have, let's say, members of the task forces, which are also consultants or getting paid for doing work by the secretariat, would that be then in breach of the code of conduct? Do you understand my question? Because in theory we could this code of conduct does not only relate to, I assume, the TEC members, but the work of the TEC itself as well, and that includes observers and members of the task forces, which are from observer groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Stig, for that. I pass our colleague from the Secretariat, Tanvi, to provide a bit of clarification on that.
Thank you.
You have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So essentially, it would depend on the sort of modalities of each constituted body. So, for example, in the provision that says committee members should recuse themselves or disclose in the context of decision making, then if only the committee members are involved in decision making or taking a decision, then this aspect would apply to them. But if it's also deliberations, then it would be, it would apply to the committee and how it functions as a whole, and it would include the task forces or any other groups as well. So it is up to each committee to decide how they want to sort of implement this and how they see it coming into place as the work progresses.
I have Stephen, you have the floor.
Thanks, Maria. Just a follow-up question to our legal colleague. If the clause reads committee members must, then surely the only possible way to construe that is that it's limited to members of the committee, i.e. members of the Technology Executive Committee. So I would suggest, I'd be interested in your opinion, that the natural way to read this is that of course it applies to what TEC members do also in the task forces, but I can't see how this language would apply to non-TEC members who are working within the task forces. Is that interpretation correct?
If I may respond to that.
Yes.
Sorry if I wasn't clear earlier, but yes, if the committee chooses the wording, which is the same wording as the WIM XCOM and the adaptation committee, then yes, it would apply only to committee members, and that would be the wording. But yeah, as the CGE has done, they've modified the wording slightly, so it would be up to the committee to decide ultimately what wording to use.
Thank you, Tanvi, for clarifying on that. I have Steve.
Thank you. I said I'm flexible on the wording, but it would be very strange if it does not apply to the task force members as well. Because that is the main work of the TEC is done in the task forces, and if we have conflict of interest in the task forces, then by default you would almost have elevated this when you come to the TEC meeting. So we need to figure out how this should be done also for task force members that are not committee members. Because otherwise we could have full conflict of interest in all the task forces, but not by the committee members, but the others, and then not for, so it doesn't make much sense.
Thank you, Steve. I get your point as well. With regards to the actual work really goes within the task force, and their conflict of interest needs to be, that is where we need to protect or put down most. So with regard to the both proposals on the table, I would not be the best person because I don't have really the legal background to judge on it, but the wording that the CGE perhaps have applied is including the role of task force members as well. So I don't know whether I would be more lenient towards the CGE one, but just to thinking aloud to ensure that we leave something here. I have Steve.
Yes, thank you. I think I will build on your proposal, Maria, and say the members of the Technology Executive Committee and its task forces must promptly disclose and recuse themselves from any decision making where their personal or financial interest may be affected, and so on and so on. So then it's clear that it applies both to the tech members and the members of the task forces.
Thank you. Thank you for Steve for coming up with the proposal. So also I think we have a proposal before us presented by Steve. May I put that proposal for your endorsement, if I can say. Secretariat Andrea is saying that there is no reference to the task force in our rules of procedures, but the language is really clear. So Andrea, could you enlighten us about more of your statement, Andrea?
Thank you, Maria. I'm just pointing out that as they stands in the current version, the rule of procedure of the TEC does not contain provision for the work of the TEC in task forces. They just contain general provision about engaging stakeholders and the international organization in the work of the TEC. The TEC has decided afterwards, in response of this provision, to organize its work in task forces involving accredited organization in the work. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, for the clarification. So I have Steve again.
Okay, but then does that mean that we actually need to amend more paras in the rules of procedure in order to have the conflict of interest clause? Because it makes no sense, as I said, to have 1/4 of the members not having this clause applying to them. So it seems like this is almost like a bigger revision of the rules of procedure than just amending it and adding this clause.
Thank you, Steve, on your intervention. So, what I propose is what Steve had proposed before us is to go along with the proposal by CGE, including the words specific on task force as well. So if I can read that, it is the TEC is the members of the Technology Executive Committee and its task force must promptly disclose and rescue themselves from any decision making where their personal or financial interest may be affected in order to avoid a conflict of interest or the appearance of one. So if I can propose that to our membership for your I would also like to highlight that these rules of procedures would need to be also adopted by the COP as well. Just want to highlight that as well. So I see no comments or feedback on the proposal. So I would say that we go with the proposal made by modified by Stig. Thank you very much. So we will go with that amendment. So the agenda on that is I would move forward, and then just to highlight again, these amendments needs to be endorsed by the COP once they meet this year, November. So with that, I would like to kindly ask all the colleagues first before that I have request for from Steve. Steve, you have the floor.
Thank you. No, I'm happy with this, but just a question too. You said it had to be approved by the COP, but we are also under the CMA. Does that mean that we also need this to be approved by the CMA, or just the COP? Just a small formality.
With my limited knowledge, I thought that I mean the COP approval, but I may be very wrong. I would ask the Secretariat could perhaps provide us more background on that. Secretariat colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So according to the rules of procedure of the TEC, Rule 61 is quite clear in saying that the rules of procedure may be amended by the TEC by consensus, and to be effective must be approved formally by the COP. So it will be the COP that would need to approve it, and pending formal approval, the TEC may decide to apply the provision or the amendment provisionally.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanvi, for that. I also have Kinga. Kinga, you have the floor.
Thank you, Maria. It's just that I'm a little lost in this process, and apologies for that. But how is this going to? I mean, I understand that this is going to be finalized at the COP, But as for the TEC, how and I'm assuming we're going to work intersessionally, but can we probably take this on the agenda of the next TEC meeting and consider it again? Because I'm a little bit behind of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Kinga, for providing where you are in terms of the discussion. Just to provide you with the background of the discussion that we are having on this agenda item was we are trying to amend the rules of procedures that governs the work of the TEC. And then particularly we would like we have more or less agreed, I would say, to go on with the proposal made by Stig, which you can also see in the chat log. It says with the proposed addition of words. So it would read as the TEC is the members of the Technology Executive Committee, and its task force must promptly disclose and rescue themselves from any decision making where their personal or financial interest may be affected in order to avoid a conflict of interest or the appearance of one. This is an amendment made to the our rules of procedure. Once we do the amendment in accordance to our rules of procedure, it is through consensus. So everybody should be should agree to the TEC members, and then that would formally can only act once the COP has decided on it. So before that, we can work as an provisional amendment. So the COP has the authority to finally gavel on our rules and procedures, the amendment that we made. I hope that clarifies Kinga. And then with that, I also have Ditram requesting the floor. Ditram, you have the floor.
Yes, I would. Yeah, I would also generally follow the recommendation from Kinga that we just have the wording just written down, the alternatives, and then reconsider it at the next meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Given that that is the sense that I'm also getting from the discussion that we are having, we will let me consult with the chair for a minute, and then we'll provide with you a way forward on that. Thank you very much. Colleagues, thank you for your patience on that. I have consulted with the chair and we would like to propose that we would revert on this item in our next meeting, given this would be also needs to be approved by the COP as well. So what we will do is the chair and myself will propose a language and then provide more clarity on this issue in our next meeting, so that we would be on board on the amendment that would be proposed next meeting. So we would like to defer this. The proposal is to defer this. Thank you very much. Stig, I have the floor. You have the floor, sorry.
Yes, no, thank you. I'm happy to decide this now, but if people have problems with that, of course, we can wait. But then you should probably have this language in the papers that are presented in front before the next meeting, so people can look at the text in the meeting documents that are published. But as I said, I'm happy to decide now, but if people have problems with that, I can wait too. Thanks.
Thank you, Stig, on your flexibility on this one. Indeed, we would be reflecting this proposal also in our proposals for the TEC to consider in our next meeting. I have Shiv. Shiv, you have the floor.
Thanks, Maria. Yeah, just like to echo what Stig said. I mean, I'm okay with the language that Stig proposed, and I'm okay moving forward with it now. But also would like to respect Kinga's and Dietram's suggestion to consider this at a later time. So we're happy either way. But I think it would be helpful if we're going to consider this later for the text to be circulated, so everyone can consult appropriately. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Shiv, and Stig. Your points are widely well taken. We would prepare a small background paper and then we would circulate before in hand, so that everyone will be aware of the proposal beforehand and have some time to consider. I have Sud you have the floor.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Chair. I have one comment. When you prepare, Chair and Vice Chair prepare the draft for that, I suggest like we can collect some, cases from other constituted bodies. Actually, we don't know whether other constituted body has the same structure with the TEC, because we have task force format, but I don't know whether other constituted body also has the same format or different. So I think that we may get more cases, the sentences from other body, and then we use that to make a better, the final draft. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Suil. Indeed, that would be really helpful, and we will include that in the background paper that we're going to prepare before our next with the chair of the TEC. I have Jorge. Jorge, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marie. I agree with considering this matter in the next meeting. And I wonder, perhaps, as we have included the task forces in the wording, the word deliberation should be included. I mean, recuse themselves from any deliberation and decision making, because I understand that the task forces deliberate and the TEC members decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge, for your suggestions. And I have a thumbs up from Shivan, and then a good nodding from Stig. Thank you very much. We would also include that also is a potential the draft for our next meeting. So colleagues, I think that concludes the agenda for today, but I would also like to ask if you can leave the camera on all the TEC members to kindly take a picture, a family photo on this, and the secretary could perhaps facilitate this discussion. Andrea, over to you, or Esther.